Have you ever witnessed a moment so dramatic it left an entire room breathless? Picture a lavish dining hall in a bustling city, glittering with chandeliers and a crowd of socialites. The atmosphere hums with expectation, yet one decision changes everything in a single, stunning instant. In tonight's story, we follow an impulsive millionaire who publicly fires a humble waitress, unaware of the extraordinary gift concealed beneath her unassuming exterior. A single note of her voice will rupture his arrogance and rewrite both their destinies. Get ready for high-stakes drama, shocking revelations, and a powerful tale of redemption that proves the human spirit can triumph over even the harshest judgment. Maggie stared at the row of wine glasses lined up on the gleaming countertop, each one waiting to be served to patrons who barely acknowledged her presence. She had worked at the Silver Nimbus, a 4-star, upscale restaurant in the heart of Manhattan, for just over a year. In that time, she had cleared countless tables and memorized more special requests than she cared to count. No salt, no dairy, gluten-free, or olive oil instead of butter. Each shift, her feet ached, her back throbbed, and her smile felt plastered into place. Yet she pressed on because in the darkest corners of her heart, Maggie held onto a glimmer of hope that all of this might lead her somewhere brighter. A fresh wave of anxiety washed over her as she recalled the conversation she'd had with her mother the evening before. Her mother's failing health weighed heavily on Maggie's shoulders. Each day it seemed like another doctor's visit or another prescription she couldn't afford. Still, her mother had encouraged her to chase her dreams, to see every challenge as a stepping stone. If only Maggie knew how to turn her real dream singing into something more than a secret she practiced in the shower. The door of the restaurant flung open, and in walked Bradley Harrington, a millionaire entrepreneur whose name graced business magazines. He made headlines whenever he partnered with big investors like Mark Cuban, or whenever he launched a new tech venture. Tonight, he was hosting a high-stakes dinner for potential collaborators. Maggie could sense the hush that fell over the room as soon as Bradley's entourage swept in. Chefs peeked out from the kitchen. Other diners paused mid-conversation to catch a glimpse. Bradley's tailored suit and sharp features epitomized success, and he carried himself with a confidence, some might say arrogance, that immediately established him as the center of attention. As Maggie approached his table with menus in hand, she felt her palms grow damp. It wasn't every day you served one of the wealthiest men in the city. Bradley's assistant, an elegant woman named Tanya, was seated at his right, busily tapping away on a tablet to keep track of the meeting. Across from him sat two potential investors, both wearing expressions that signaled they were hoping to be dazzled by Bradley's latest pitch. For the first few minutes, all was calm. Maggie took their drink orders: an expensive vintage Bordeaux for Bradley, mineral water for Tanya, and cocktails for the guests. She delivered them without incident, even managing a steady hand as she poured the wine. She was proud of the professional demeanor she had honed over months of tense interactions with high-profile customers. Yet tonight, fate had something else in mind. When she returned to take dinner orders, the tension at the table had risen. Bradley was in the middle of explaining how his new real estate venture was destined to revolutionize the upper echelons of the market. His voice carried through the dining area, capturing the attention of curious onlookers. He had just finished painting an image of opulent skyscrapers with built-in private jets, an outlandish idea that somehow sounded feasible when delivered in Bradley Harrington's polished baritone. "Are you ready to order?" Maggie asked with a smile. Bradley barely looked up. "Ribeye, medium rare, roasted vegetables on the side." His two guests each ordered elaborate dishes involving lobster tails and truffle butter. Tanya requested a simple seared salmon, no sauce, with a side of steamed vegetables. Maggie scribbled everything down neatly, repeating back each item to ensure accuracy. She thanked them and turned to leave. As she stepped away, however, her foot slipped on a slick patch of water a fellow server had just dripped. The next moment played out in slow motion. Maggie lost her balance, her right hand still holding the notepad flailing in the air. Her left hand gripped the table in a desperate bid to remain upright. But the tablecloth gave way, and in a horrifying chain reaction, she sent one of the cocktails and, most disastrously, the precious glass of Bordeaux flying directly into Bradley's lap. For a second, the entire restaurant froze. The bright red stain spread across the expensive fabric of Bradley's suit pants, and an audible gasp escaped from those nearby. Maggie's heart pounded so loudly she feared it might burst out of her chest. She rushed to grab napkins, sputtering apologies. "I'm so sorry, sir," she gasped, tears stinging the corners of her eyes. I slipped." Bradley's face hardened, his jaw clenching as he stood. The half-finished glass of wine had shattered on the marble floor, leaving shards that glistened like dangerous jewels. Dinah, the restaurant's manager, rushed over, frantic to defuse the situation. "Mr. Harrington, we will have your suit cleaned immediately," Dinah said, pulling out her phone to summon a cleaning service. "And your meal will be on the house. Please allow us to." But Bradley raised a hand. His eyes locked on Maggie, who was trembling with embarrassment and fear. The hush that fell over the restaurant intensified. It felt like even the air was suspended in dread, waiting for his response. "Is this how you run your establishment? Hiring clumsy, incompetent staff?" Bradley's voice was dangerously calm, sending a chill down Maggie's spine. Maggie opened her mouth to apologize again, but Bradley continued, "I host a critical meeting, and I'm drenched in wine because of a careless waitress. This is unacceptable." Dinah tried to intervene. "It was an accident, Mr. Harrington. Maggie is one of our best servers. Please let us fix this." "Best servers? That's hard to believe." Bradley turned to Maggie, who could barely lift her eyes to meet his glare. "As far as I'm concerned, you're fired. Right here, right now." Gasps erupted across the restaurant. A group of other servers watched from the sidelines, horrified. Several customers craned their necks, while others pretended not to notice, uncomfortable with the abrupt cruelty. Maggie stood there, paralyzed, tears threatening to betray her composure. No job meant no income. No income meant no way to pay the medical bills, piling up for her mother. This single twist of fate threatened to unravel everything. Dinah's face paled. She glanced between Maggie and Bradley, her loyalty to her staff warring with the practicality of appeasing a wealthy client whose patronage could make or break a restaurant's reputation. The frustration and guilt etched into Dinah's eyes told Maggie that she was about to lose her only lifeline. "Sir," Maggie choked out, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "I truly didn't mean." "I don't want to hear excuses," Bradley growled. He glared at Dinah. "If you won't do it, I'll ensure she's gone by tomorrow. My lawyers can handle the rest." With that, the conversation was over. Bradley strode away to the restroom, leaving his horrified companions in his wake. The hush lingered. Some diners whispered among themselves, while others looked down, uncertain how to react to such a public humiliation. Dinah placed a gentle hand on Maggie's arm. She sighed, her voice trembling with sympathy and resignation. "I'm so sorry, Maggie," she whispered, guiding her away from the dining area. "We'll talk in the back." Maggie nodded numbly. Tears blurred her vision as she was ushered behind the scenes, out of the public eye. Her dream of saving enough money to cover her mother's treatments was vanishing in the blink of an eye. If she was truly fired, where would she go? 3 days passed, each more agonizing than the last. Maggie's termination was indeed final. The restaurant's management felt powerless against a man of Bradley Harrington's influence. Dinah had tried to offer references to help Maggie find work elsewhere, but the heartbreak of losing her stable income gnawed at her. She spent her days at her mother's apartment, sitting by the bed, sorting out medical bills, and wondering how she'd make ends meet. Late in the evenings, Maggie would retreat to the dingy rooftop of the apartment complex. There, under the faint glow of streetlights and the looming silhouette of Manhattan's skyline, she would sing softly old jazz ballads, gospel hymns her mother had taught her, and pop tunes she'd grown to love. Her voice was rich, nuanced with emotion born of life's hardships. That voice was her only solace, the one thing that made her feel alive amid a storm of despair. On the fourth day, she ventured to the Silver Nimbus to pick up her final paycheck. Her heart pounded as she walked through the doors where she'd once greeted guests with a polite smile. The hush and shimmering elegance now felt menacing, each corner a reminder of her mortifying ordeal. Dina met her near the entrance, her expression a careful blend of concern and pity. "I really am sorry," Dina said. "You didn't deserve that scene." Maggie nodded and forced a tight smile. She accepted the paycheck quietly. It was enough to cover next month's rent, but not much more. As she turned to leave, Dina hesitated. "Maggie, before you go, can I ask you something?" Maggie paused. "Of course." Dina cast a glance over her shoulder, ensuring no one from upper management was in earshot. "I caught you humming in the stockroom once or twice," she said quietly. "Your voice is beautiful. Maybe you should think about pursuing that gift. Life has a funny way of leading us to where we need to be, even if it hurts at first." A lump formed in Maggie's throat. She managed to smile, genuinely touched by the unexpected encouragement. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes glistening with gratitude. And with that, she stepped out of the Silver Nimbus, not knowing if she would ever return. Bradley Harrington prided himself on efficiency and results. That was the cornerstone of his success. But in the days following his explosive outburst, something gnawed at him, a subtle sense of guilt or perhaps an aftertaste of regret. Despite his outward bravado, he couldn't shake the image of the devastated young woman he had fired in front of everyone. He had humiliated her, and while he'd often employed ruthless tactics in business, he was unaccustomed to lingering remorse. His mood was sour as he prepared for a gala event, a fundraising function for the East Side Arts Initiative, an organization that supported community theaters, music programs, and emerging artists. He had been invited to speak and make a sizable donation as a way to polish his philanthropic image, though he told himself it was just a strategic networking opportunity. Deep down, he admired artists and their ability to touch hearts in ways corporate ventures never could. That night, the ballroom was a swirl of champagne glasses, polished floors, and elegantly dressed attendees. The stage featured a rotating lineup of performances, a young poet reciting verses, a modern dance troupe showcasing their choreography, and an amateur jazz quartet that kept the crowd's energy alive. Bradley positioned himself near the front. He listened with a respectful detachment, occasionally nodding in appreciation, but more focused on who else was in the room. At tables across the ballroom, influential donors and local celebrities mingled. Then, a soft hush fell, and an announcer introduced the next performer. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a remarkable voice here tonight. Please welcome Miss Margaret Dawson, known to her friends as Maggie." Maggie? The name rang faintly in Bradley's ears, but he chalked it up to coincidence. The lights dimmed, and a spotlight fell on the stage. There, standing shyly at the microphone, was the young waitress he had fired. She wore a simple, long dress in a muted shade of blue, her hair loosely pinned back, accentuating her delicate features. Bradley felt his pulse quicken in surprise. Yet, the transformation was striking. Gone was the timid server balancing trays. In her place stood a poised woman gazing out at the crowd. Maggie's hands gripped the microphone stand, her heart pounding. She had been invited to sing thanks to a stroke of luck. A friend of a friend overheard her singing at an open mic event in a small coffee shop and had nudged the organizers of this fundraiser to give her a slot. Maggie had agreed, desperate for any chance to share her voice, but had no idea it would lead her directly into the eyes of the man who had humiliated her just days before. The moment she opened her mouth, the room was enveloped in a haunting, angelic sound. She sang a rendition of an old jazz standard, "Summertime," her voice a tapestry of both power and vulnerability. The softness in her lower register melted seamlessly into soaring high notes, each phrase imbued with genuine emotion. The audience collectively held its breath. Even the clink of glassware faded into silence. Bradley found himself unable to look away, His chest felt tight, as if each note resonated in the cavity of his heart, stirring feelings he rarely allowed himself to experience. There was no question. She was extraordinary. By the time Maggie reached the final chorus, an undercurrent of awe pulsed through the audience. Some had tears in their eyes. Others stared, mesmerized. The last note hung in the air like a whispered prayer. Before dissolving into thunderous applause, her performance concluded. Maggie gave a small, humble bow. Bradley's palms stung from clapping so hard, a mix of admiration and shock swirling in his mind. How could he have been so cruel to someone so gifted? The memory of her face, flushed with humiliation, collided with the angelic presence before him. He felt a pang of remorse that refused to be ignored. As the evening wore on, Bradley struggled to focus on the speeches and the networking. He found himself glancing back to where performers gathered, hoping to catch another glimpse of Maggie. Eventually, he decided he couldn't leave without speaking to her. Despite the swirl of conversation around him, he navigated the crowd until he found her standing near a refreshment table, chatting quietly with an older man who looked like a music teacher. Every bit of confidence he normally exuded in the boardroom seemed to fail him now. He cleared his throat. "Maggie?" She turned, her eyes widening in surprise. The memory of her public firing was still raw, and a flash of hurt flickered across her face. "Mr. Harrington," she said stiffly, nodding to the older man that she would be a moment. She set down her water and folded her arms protectively across her stomach. Bradley inhaled slowly, realizing with discomfort that his usual bravado would only make this worse. "Your performance was remarkable. Truly. I didn't know you sang." Maggie forced a polite smile, though her posture was tense. "Why would you? I was just a waitress." His face reddened at the jab, but he recognized he had earned it. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry," he managed. The words sounded stilted on his tongue, but he pressed on. "I was under a lot of pressure that night, though. That's no excuse for what I did. My behavior was unforgivable." Maggie glanced around, noticing a few onlookers curious about their exchange. She resisted the urge to lash out publicly, reminding herself she had vowed never to sink to that level of humiliation. "I accept your apology," she said, her voice calm but reserved. "But I lost my job. Not just a paycheck, but my mother's lifeline. It wasn't just some random, part-time gig for me." Bradley's gaze dropped, guilt tightening his chest. He recalled reading an article once about the burden of medical bills. "I see. IHAD, no idea. Because you never bothered to ask," Maggie replied quietly. A flash of emotion crossed her face, and she exhaled. "But look, I don't have time to hold grudges. My mom's health depends on me finding work, and if singing doesn't pay quickly, I'll need to do something else. So, excuse me if I don't have the energy for pleasantries right now." She began to turn away, but Bradley gently reached for her elbow, careful not to be forceful. "Maggie, wait, please. I might be able to help." She paused, uncertainty coloring her features. She studied him for a moment. "Why would you help me?" He swallowed. "Because I owe you. And because tonight you showed me something I haven't felt in a long time. Genuine awe. Your voice is incredible. I can't just walk away after hearing that, and knowing I contributed to your hardships." Maggie bit her lip, torn between wariness and the desperate need for financial assistance. "What exactly do you have in mind?" Bradley's gaze shifted to the older man who had been talking to Maggie moments before. "If you give me a chance to discuss it somewhere quieter, maybe we can come to an arrangement that benefits us both." 2 days later, they met at a small cafe near Lincoln Center. Bradley had arranged for a private corner table and arrived ahead of time, a bundle of nerves swirling in his stomach. He was not used to feeling nervous. He built empires with confidence. But something about Maggie disarmed him. Perhaps it was the memory of her tearful eyes that night, or the mesmerizing impact of her singing. The fact that he had wronged her so publicly, and now sought atonement, put him on unfamiliar ground. Maggie arrived wearing a simple dress and a light coat. Her hair was pinned in a low bun, and she carried a folder, presumably with some sort of resume or references. She was determined not to let this become a pity party. She needed a real solution. She sat across from him, her expression guarded. "So," she began, glancing at him with measured politeness. "You mentioned a plan?" Bradley leaned forward, folding his hands. "I have connections at music venues, some philanthropic circles that support new artists. It's part of the reason I was at that fundraiser. I sponsor local events to promote cultural growth, which also improves your public image," Maggie interjected, arching an eyebrow. He allowed himself a tight-lipped smile. "Yes, I won't deny there's a PR angle, but that doesn't negate the fact that I can open certain doors. I'd like to help you book performances, find a vocal coach if you want, and ensure you have the financial stability to focus on your music." Maggie's heart pounded. That sounded too good to be true, like a fairy tale. Could she trust him? "What's in it for you?" Bradley hesitated. "I want to make amends. And, I won't lie, it would look good for me to sponsor an emerging talent, especially after what happened at the Silver Nimbus. People talk, and I have a reputation to maintain." There it was, the transparency she had needed to hear. She appreciated it, even though the harsh reality stung. "So, you help me, and in turn, you get to fix your PR issue. Let's be honest, you publicly humiliated me." That scene was pretty large. Bradley nodded. "I can't change the past, but I can offer you a future in which your talent doesn't go unnoticed, and you'll be compensated enough to cover your mother's medical bills and living expenses while you establish yourself." Maggie glanced down at her folder, fiddling with the edges. She thought of her mother's hopeful smile, the nights she'd spent practicing songs in the cramped apartment. She also thought of how humiliating it would be to sign on with the man who had fired her so callously. But pride alone wouldn't pay hospital bills. She could see a lifeline being offered, and even if it was fueled partly by self-interest, it was still a lifeline. "I'll consider it," she said finally. "But I want everything in writing. No hidden clauses, no strings I don't know about. And if, at any point, I feel I'm being exploited or humiliated again, I'm done." Bradley looked relieved. "Understood. I'll have my legal team draft a straightforward contract." Maggie sighed. "I'll have someone look it over too." With that, an odd partnership was formed. Maggie left the cafe feeling both anxious and tentatively hopeful. Bradley watched her go, a swirl of emotions he couldn't quite identify churning inside him. In the weeks that followed, Maggie found herself rehearsing in studio spaces she never dreamed she'd enter. Bradley introduced her to a well-respected vocal coach, Emmanuel Bianchi, who had trained Broadway performers. Emmanuel quickly discovered that Maggie's raw talent was a rare gem, only needing refinement. Meanwhile, Bradley arranged for small but significant performance opportunities, a reception at a charity gala, a spot in an exclusive open mic for industry insiders, and even a cameo singing the national anthem at a local sports event. Public curiosity about Maggie's background grew when word spread that Bradley Harrington, the high-powered millionaire, was personally endorsing her. A few tabloids picked up the story, hinting at a possible romance, or spinning theories that she was a secret heiress. Neither rumor was true, of course, but they served to stoke intrigue, drawing bigger audiences to Maggie's performances. Yet behind the glitz of these new experiences, Maggie grappled with doubt. Late at night, she'd lie awake and recall the day she was fired. She wondered if Bradley was truly repentant, or if she was just a pawn in a chess game meant to bolster his image. Their interactions remained polite but formal. Bradley would check in on her progress, occasionally pop into rehearsals, or arrange for them to meet potential sponsors. He remained respectful, yet distant. Despite her skepticism, Maggie focused on honing her craft. Emmanuel pushed her to explore new genres, classical arias, musical theater pieces, and even soulful R&B numbers. With each performance, her confidence grew. She received standing ovations, glowing reviews from local critics, and even a hint of interest from a small record label. The excitement was like a dream unfolding in real time. During one important performance, a fundraiser for children's music programs, Maggie caught sight of her mother in the front row. Thanks to Bradley's patronage, they could afford better medical care. Her mother's face shone with pride. For the first time in months, Maggie sang free from the weight of desperation. She soared through a deeply emotional rendition of Somewhere Over the Rainbow, hitting each note with precision and soul. By the end, tears gleamed in the eyes of many audience members. When she stepped off stage, applause still thundering in her ears, Bradley approached. For a moment, she saw something unfamiliar in his gaze, pure admiration, tinged with the slightest hint of awe. "You were phenomenal," he said softly. And Maggie, perhaps for the first time since they'd met, genuinely smiled at him. Tensions rise. Not everyone was pleased with Maggie's rapid ascent. Whispers circulated that her success was unearned, that she was merely a project of a wealthy benefactor. Even in philanthropic circles, jealousy reared its head. Some believed the resources she was receiving would be better invested in artists who had been struggling for years. Others disapproved of Bradley's involvement, dismissing him as a corporate shark trying to buy his way into the art scene. Maggie felt the sharp sting of these critiques. She questioned herself constantly, wondering if she truly deserved the spotlight. She clung to Emmanuel's reassurance and the unwavering support of her mother. Still, the rumors and side glances from other performers weighed on her. During a rehearsal break one afternoon, she confided in Bradley. They stood near a grand piano, in an empty auditorium, the hush of the cavernous space echoing her uncertainty. "I don't want people thinking I just got lucky because you wrote a check," she said, pacing nervously. "I want them to respect my voice, not your bank account." Bradley nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "I understand, but your talent is undeniable. People talk, especially when something or someone threatens the status quo. You can't let that stop you." Maggie sighed. "Easy to say. It's harder to feel worthy when rumors swirl like that." Bradley hesitated before speaking again. "Maybe you could hold a free concert at a community center, or host a workshop for young singers. Show everyone you're more than just a project. Let them see your passion for music and your willingness to help others." Maggie's eyes lit up at the idea. She had once dreamed of mentoring aspiring singers, especially those who couldn't afford lessons. The suggestion felt right. It aligned with her values and would also help quell some of the criticism. "You'd help me set it up?" He smiled. "Of course, let's do it." A month later, Maggie found herself standing on a makeshift stage in a refurbished community center in Queens. The auditorium wasn't fancy, no sparkling chandeliers or VIP-only seating, but it was brimming with local families, aspiring singers, and supporters who had heard about Maggie's free concert and vocal workshop. Emmanuel had volunteered to help, and Bradley had covered expenses for sound equipment, flyers, and refreshments. Maggie kicked off the event with a short recital, performing a range of songs that showcased the evolution of her vocal journey. The audience was rapt, many seeing a professional caliber performance for the first time in their own neighborhood. Afterward, she invited several young singers on stage, offering tips, encouraging them to believe in their own voices. The air crackled with excitement and inspiration. Bradley watched from the sidelines, a strange emotion tugging at him. In Maggie, he saw a reflection of the type of grit and determination he once revered. Yet her path was paved with kindness and humility, qualities he'd often sidelined in pursuit of success. In that moment, he felt an unfamiliar swell of admiration that transcended professional respect. During a lull, Maggie found him in a corner, helping direct volunteers to set up more chairs. She walked up and smiled, her face glowing from the rush of performing. "Thank you," she said simply, "for making all this possible." He paused, meeting her gaze with a softening expression. "You did all the hard work. I just wrote a check." She shook her head. "You opened doors I couldn't, and you apologized for what you did. Most people wouldn't do that." Bradley swallowed, the weight of his regret suddenly heavy again. "Maggie, I truly am sorry." I can't erase what happened, but I'll spend as long as it takes trying to make it right." Her eyes glistened, and she nodded. There were no more words needed. Success continued to blossom. Maggie was booked for a series of performances in elegant venues, culminating in an invitation to sing at a prestigious holiday gala, featuring top-tier performers. Attendees would include prominent philanthropists and celebrities. It was the kind of event that could catapult her into genuine stardom. On the night of the gala, Maggie arrived in a gown loaned to her by a famous designer who had been captivated by her story. She took a moment to absorb her surroundings: shimmering lights, crystal table settings, and an audience of influential figures. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from exhilaration. She had come a long way from balancing trays in the silver nimbus. Backstage, she took a moment to reflect. Then she made her way out to the stage. Silence descended as the lights narrowed on her. In that hushed space, she began her piece, a powerful ballad that soared with every note. She had chosen it to tell a story of heartbreak, resilience, and redemption, weaving in all the raw emotion she had experienced. The audience sat spellbound. By the final refrain, many were in tears. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. Bradley, seated in the front row, stood, giving her a standing ovation that spread through the room like wildfire. Cameras flashed, capturing a moment that would be talked about for weeks to come. Maggie dipped her head in a gracious bow, tears of joy glimmering in her eyes. But as soon as she stepped off stage, she saw Dina, the manager of the Silver Nimbus, waiting in the wings. Dina was clapping with unbridled enthusiasm, tears staining her cheeks. Maggie rushed forward and embraced her, shocked to see her old boss at such a high-profile event. "I was invited through one of our VIP patrons," Dina explained, stepping back and smiling widely. "I had to see you perform. I'm so proud of you, Maggie. And we have a proposition." Maggie furrowed her brow in confusion. "Proposition?" Dina's eyes sparkled. "Under new ownership, we're reopening the Silver Nimbus with a fresh start. We want a performer in residence, someone to sing a few nights a week, maybe even help with special events. The pay is excellent, and you'd have creative freedom." Maggie blinked in astonishment. The same restaurant that once saw her fired was now asking her to come back, this time, on her own terms. The irony wasn't lost on her. She felt a gentle hand on her shoulder and turned to see Bradley, who had come backstage. "This is everything you deserve," he said softly, his eyes filled with pride. Dina nodded. "We know about your new opportunities, so we'd work around your schedule. It would be an honor to have you." Maggie's throat tightened with emotion. She thought of how her journey had twisted and turned, leading her here. She glanced at Bradley, who had once been the villain in her story. Now, he seemed genuinely happy for her. She smiled, warmth flooding her chest. "I'd be honored. Thank you." In the end, Maggie's trajectory did not stop at the Silver Nimbus. Offers poured in, from recording contracts to invitations to tour. But she accepted the residence at her former workplace, transforming it into a beacon for music lovers who flocked to witness the waitress-turned-singing sensation. Bradley and Maggie never defined their bond as purely professional. A subtle, tender friendship, and perhaps the seed of something deeper, had grown from the ashes of humiliation and regret. Reporters asked countless times, "What prompted your big break?" And Maggie often replied, with a faint, thoughtful smile, "I owe part of it to a terrible moment that led me to discover the true power of my voice." Over time, Bradley Harrington's circle also noted changes in the usually hard-edged tycoon. He sponsored more art programs, set up foundations to help struggling creatives, and volunteered time to speak about second chances. Whenever people asked him about his transformation, he'd trace his memory back to that fateful night with a glass of wine and a terrified waitress, and simply say, "I learned the cost of arrogance can be someone else's dream if you're not careful." The curtain fell on that chapter of their lives, but a new one began. Maggie continued to soar as a vocalist, moving the hearts of audiences everywhere. And for Bradley, every performance he attended reminded him that redemption was not just a hollow concept, but a living, breathing force. Sometimes, it took a spilled glass of Bordeaux to reveal the hidden brilliance in someone you had once failed to see. Thank you for joining us on this emotional roller coaster, one filled with spilled wine, shattered dreams, and an inspiring redemption that rose from the ashes of humiliation. Maggie's journey reminds us that even in our darkest moments, raw talent and unwavering perseverance can illuminate the path to success. Bradley Harrington's transformation shows us that it's never too late to recognize the humanity in others and to make amends for past wrongs. Their entwined destinies stand as a powerful testament to the fact that greatness can sometimes emerge from life's most painful intersections. If you found this story moving and uplifting, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing you stories of hope, drama, and hard-earned triumph. Spread the word, and let these lessons of forgiveness, courage, and personal growth inspire others around you. After all, every life has its own unforgettable aria waiting to be sung.